Picture the scroll. You're 3 videos deep into your TikTok feed, thumb moving on autopilot, when a caption stops you cold. The biggest theory ever. Is Britney Spears still alive? The video underneath has over 1 million likes. Not 1,000. Not 10,000. 1 million plus people have tapped a heart on a claim that a global pop star secretly died and was quietly swapped out for a body double, or a clone, or, depending on which corner of the internet you're in, something stranger still. That's the video Jayden James Federline says he stumbled onto in the middle of July 2026. And what he said next, on a live stream that got clipped, reposted, and picked up by entertainment outlets within a day, wasn't really about his mother's DNA. It was about all of us, about why a claim this outlandish could rack up over 1 million likes before a single person asked for proof. This is the story of what Jaden actually said, what's been confirmed, what hasn't, and why the mechanics behind that number matter more than the conspiracy itself. On Friday, July 17, 2026, Jaden, Britney Spears' younger son with ex-husband Kevin Federline, and by most accounts the more publicly reserved of her 2 sons, went live on social media. According to multiple entertainment outlets, including Us Weekly, Yahoo Entertainment, and IB Times UK, he was filming from inside a car when a fan's comment landed. Did it feel silly that people online kept insisting his mother had been replaced by a clone? His answer wasn't scripted, and it wasn't diplomatic. Jaden described opening TikTok and landing on a video with roughly 1.2 million likes, its caption billing itself as the biggest theory ever, the question of whether Britney Spears was even still alive. He didn't treat it as a harmless internet joke. According to the recording circulated afterward, he pointed out something almost embarrassingly simple. You can go to her page right now and see her. That line, "Go look at her page," became the headline moment. But the more revealing part came right after it. Jaden reportedly said people know how gullible audiences can be, and they use that against them. Anyone who scrolls past a post with enough likes attached to it, he suggested, tends to just believe it. Engagement standing in for evidence. Outlets differ slightly on where exactly he was streaming from. Some report TikTok, others Instagram, a small inconsistency worth flagging rather than papering over, since it's the kind of detail that gets smoothed out in second-hand reporting. What's consistent across the coverage, though, is the substance of what he said and the date it happened. This wasn't Jaden's first time addressing his mother publicly, and it wasn't the first time the clone theory had made the rounds either. Understanding why his comments landed the way they did means looking at both threads. The idea that the Britney Spears posting dance videos and life updates online isn't the real Britney Spears didn't start in 2026. It's been circulating for at least 2 years, picking up fresh oxygen every time she posts something unusual. A strange caption, a repetitive dance clip, a gap in her posting schedule. In 2024, reality TV personality Kristen Cavallari gave the theory a mainstream boost on her podcast, flatly telling listeners the woman online wasn't Britney Spears and encouraging people to compare old photos. On the same episode, according to reporting from Complex, she tied both the Britney theory and a similar Kanye West rumor to Illuminati and cabal conspiracy framing. That's the ecosystem Jaden's TikTok discovery dropped into. It wasn't a brand new claim. It was the latest iteration of a rumor that had already had years to calcify into something that feels, to a certain slice of the internet, like established lore rather than speculation. And that's exactly why a single video with 1.2 million likes could feel less like one person's wild theory and more like confirmation of something everybody already knew. Britney herself has been the subject of relentless, often baseless speculation for years, about her health, her mental state, her autonomy, a pattern that predates and outlasts any single viral clip. The conservatorship that controlled her life and finances for 13 years, and that ended in 2021, left behind a public that had grown accustomed to treating her every post as a coded message or a cry for help. The clone theory is, in some sense, a mutation of that older habit. If you've spent a decade being told to read between the lines of Britney's Instagram, maybe it's not even her, isn't that large a leap? To understand why Jaden's comments carried weight beyond a random fan defending a celebrity, it helps to know where he and his mother have actually stood over the years, because it hasn't been a straight line. Back in September 2022, when Jaden was 15, he sat for an interview with ITV and spoke candidly about the distance between him and his mother. He explained that he and his older brother, Sean Preston, had skipped Britney's wedding to Sam Asghari that year, in part because she hadn't invited the rest of the family, and the two brothers didn't want to navigate that alone. He was honest that he and Britney weren't really speaking at the time, but he didn't frame it as permanent. He said he believed the relationship could be repaired, adding that it would take real time and effort, and that he wanted her to be mentally well before they reconnected. That's a 15-year-old choosing honesty over a tidy public image. No denial that things were strained, but also no declaration that the door was closed for good. The years that followed were reportedly difficult. Jayden and Sean Preston largely lived with their father after he relocated the family to Hawaii in 2023, and contact with their mother was, by most accounts, limited for a stretch. But the story didn't stay frozen there. Multiple outlets reported that Britney reunited with both sons in December 2024, and coverage since has described the three of them working toward a closer relationship. Some reporting has also suggested the boys played a supportive role encouraging their mother toward professional help following a difficult period that included a DUI arrest earlier in 2026, though the precise details of that arrest and recovery process are still being filled in by ongoing reporting and are worth treating as developing rather than fully settled. By July 2026, Jaden and Sean Preston were visible enough in their own right to walk in runway shows during Paris Fashion Week, a sign of a public profile and a family dynamic that looked meaningfully different from the estrangement described back in 2022. Line those two moments up, the 15-year-old carefully hoping for repair, and the 19-year-old, for years later, publicly and bluntly shutting down a conspiracy theory about his mother's identity, and the live stream reads less like a random outburst and more like a data point on a longer arc someone who was once willing to admit, on camera, that things were broken had no obvious reason to fake a public defense years later if he didn't mean it. Here's the part that's easy to skate past. Jaden wasn't primarily making a claim about biology or forensics. He was making a claim about human behavior, specifically about what a like count does to our judgment. A number like 1.2 million doesn't function as neutral information. On a platform like TikTok, it operates as social proof. It tells your brain, before you've evaluated a single fact, that a lot of other people have already decided this is worth paying attention to, maybe even worth believing. You don't need a source, a document, or an eyewitness. You need velocity. And velocity is exactly what algorithmic platforms are built to reward. This isn't just an armchair observation. It's been measured. In a landmark 2018 study published in the journal Science, MIT researchers Sarush Vasugi, Deb Roy, and Sinan Errol analyzed roughly 126,000 rumor cascades on Twitter, involving about 3 million people and more than 4.5 million retweets between 2006 and 2017. Their conclusion was stark. False stories consistently traveled farther, faster, and to more people than true ones, and the gap couldn't be explained away by bots alone. Human sharing behavior was doing real work to spread falsehoods more effectively than facts. Novelty was a big part of why. An unexpected or shocking claim triggers a stronger urge to share it than a mundane, accurate update does. Swap in Britney's case, and the pattern fits with unsettling precision. A caption noting that Britney posted a new video is unremarkable. A caption asking whether she's secretly dead is instant novelty, and novelty is currency. The underlying footage can be identical in both scenarios. The framing is what turns it into something shareable. There's a second mechanism at work too, one that explains why the theory can feel more credible the longer it circulates, even without new evidence. Psychologists call it the illusory truth effect, the well-documented tendency for repeated claims to feel truer simply because they're familiar, regardless of whether they line up with what you already know to be accurate. A 2015 study by Lisa Fazio, Nadia Brazier, B. Keith Payne, and Elizabeth Marsh, published in the Journal of Experimental Psychology, General, found that repetition boosted people's truth ratings for statements even when those statements directly contradicted knowledge the participants already had. The brain mistakes, "I've heard this before," for "this has been verified," a shortcut known as processing fluency. Applied here, that means every reaction video, every stitched TikTok, every comment section rehashing the same clone theory doesn't add new evidence. It just makes the claim feel more familiar, and familiarity gets misread as credibility. 10 videos repeating one baseless idea aren't 10 independent confirmations. They're often the same unverified claim wearing 10 different outfits. There's also reason to think this is fixable, at least partly. A 2021 study in Nature by Gordon Pennycook, David Rand, and colleagues found that simply prompting people to think about accuracy before they share something measurably improved the quality of the news they were willing to pass along, based on both survey experiments and a live field test on Twitter. And a 2020 digital literacy field experiment led by Andrew Guess of Princeton, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, found that a short intervention improved people's ability to tell real headlines from fake ones by over 26% in the United States and over 17% in India. In other words, the same research that explains why a baseless clone theory could outrun the truth also suggests that a simple nudge, stop, check the source, ask what evidence actually exists, can measurably change what people believe and share. Jaden's exasperated, "Go look at her page," was, functionally, exactly that kind of nudge, delivered without a lab coat or a citation, just frustration. It's tempting to assume that once a clear, level-headed correction exists, she's right there, go look, a rumor this thin should collapse. In practice, that's rarely how online belief works, and it's worth spending a moment on why. Part of it is that engagement on the original clone video doesn't actually tell you what people think. A like, a share, or a stitch can mean genuine belief, but it can just as easily mean someone found the claim funny, wanted to mock it, or was simply curious enough to click. The platform's algorithm doesn't distinguish between those motivations, it just counts the interaction and pushes the post further because it's generating activity. So a portion of that 1.2 million number almost certainly represents people who never believed the theory at all, yet their engagement still built the illusion of mass conviction for everyone scrolling past afterward. Part of it is also timing. Jaden's response arrived after the theory had already had time to spread, mutate, and get repeated across dozens of secondary accounts, reaction channels, clip compilations, comment threads quoting other comment threads. By the time his pushback reached a given viewer, they may have already encountered 3 or 4 versions of the same claim, each one reinforcing the last. A single correction, however direct, is competing against a rumor that's had a considerable head start and multiple points of contact. And part of it is simply that skepticism takes more effort than acceptance. Believing a caption at face value costs nothing. Pausing to check Britney's own account, compare timestamps, or ask what actual evidence exists for a clone, as opposed to a celebrity behaving unpredictably, which is a far more mundane explanation, requires a moment most people scrolling a feed aren't inclined to spend. Jaden's frustration, in that sense, wasn't really aimed at any single TikTok creator. It was aimed at that gap between how little effort it takes to spread a claim and how much effort it takes to check one. None of this means the theory is somehow more legitimate because it spread widely, or that everyone who engaged with it is careless. It means viral reach and factual accuracy are simply 2 different measurements, and platforms are optimized to reward the first one regardless of the second. That's the uncomfortable truth Jaden landed on without necessarily framing it in those terms. Britney Spears is far from the only celebrity to have a secretly replaced theory attached to her name. Jaden himself referenced a similar rumor swirling around Kanye West around the same period, and versions of this claim have circulated about other musicians and public figures over the years, usually gaining traction after a stretch of erratic or heavily scrutinized public behavior. The pattern tends to follow a similar arc. A celebrity does something that looks unusual on camera, a corner of the internet decides the simplest explanation, they're just having an off day, or they're dealing with something private, is less interesting than an elaborate one, and the elaborate version starts collecting shares. For Britney specifically, that pattern has extra fuel because of her documented history. The 13-year conservatorship that controlled her personal and financial decisions until 2021 was, for a long stretch, treated by fans and media alike as evidence that something was being hidden from the public, which, in that case, turned out to be largely true, since the #FreeBritney movement's suspicions about undue control over her life were substantially validated once court records became public. That history means a segment of her audience has learned, understandably, not to take official narratives about her at face value. The problem is that the same instinct that once helped uncover a real injustice can also be redirected toward a theory with zero evidentiary basis, like a clone conspiracy, simply because it's emotionally familiar terrain. They're hiding the truth about Britney was true once, so it feels plausible again. That's arguably the most important nuance in this entire story, and it's one Jaden's comments only gesture at rather than spell out directly. Not all skepticism about a celebrity's public image is equally justified. Distinguishing a well-founded concern from an unfounded conspiracy requires actually looking at the evidence in front of you, in this case, an active, verifiable account, rather than defaulting to whichever explanation feels most dramatic. It's worth being precise about what's actually documented here versus what's being inferred, because that distinction is the whole point of Jaden's message. Confirmed and Multiply reported, Jaden went live on July 17, 2026, described encountering a viral TikTok with roughly 1.2 million likes questioning whether his mother was still alive, told viewers they could check her page and see her for themselves, and criticized the broader pattern of people believing whatever racks up enough engagement, reportedly framing it as people knowing how gullible audiences are and exploiting that. Also documented, from years earlier, Jaden's 2022 ITV interview, where he acknowledged distance from his mother while expressing hope that the relationship could eventually be repaired. Reported but resting on second-hand accounts rather than a single fully verified transcript, the exact platform of the live stream, TikTok versus Instagram, varies by outlet, and some of the finer texture around family reconciliation timing and the circumstances of Britney's more recent personal struggles. Not established at all, by any outlet, credible or otherwise, that Britney Spears has actually been replaced by a body double, a clone, or anyone else. No evidence has ever been produced for that claim beyond the vague suspicion generated by ordinary, if sometimes erratic, social media posts. An active Instagram account can't serve as forensic proof that every single video was filmed in real time, but the absence of minute-by-minute verification isn't evidence of replacement either. That's a gap conspiracy theories are built to exploit, not a gap they've ever closed. So what did Jaden finally admit, if we're being careful with the word? Not that the clone theory has any basis, he explicitly rejected it. What he put into plain language, probably without meaning to hand anyone a media literacy lecture, is that his mother's public image has become a kind of commodity for a certain corner of the internet. Outrage, mystery, and fake revelations simply perform better than the boring, verifiable fact that she's alive and posting from her own account. He wasn't confirming a secret. He was naming a business model. Strip away the clone theory itself, which, again, has never had a shred of real evidence behind it, and what's left is a 19-year-old accidentally describing exactly how modern misinformation works. A claim doesn't need proof to travel. It needs a shocking caption and enough early engagement to look legitimate. Repetition does the rest, making a baseless idea feel familiar enough to pass as common knowledge. Jaden's message was almost insultingly simple. The woman you're debating the existence of has a public account you can open in 4 seconds. That it needed saying at all, to over 1 million people who'd already liked a post suggesting otherwise, says less about Britney Spears than it does about the incentives baked into the platforms we're all scrolling through. So here's the actual question worth sitting with. The next time a wild claim about a public figure crosses your feed with a number attached that looks too big to ignore, are you checking the source, or just trusting the crowd?